Good evening. We're going to continue now what I began last year. Basically, directives from the Rebbe, Hiros from the Rebbe directly on how to communicate effectively. Which, we don't have a better teacher than the Rebbe himself of how we communicate. So what I did was, you received it, you can check it out if you have it on the phone, or I have a printout here. I took 10 main Hiros from the Rebbe, that if you follow those 10, you'll really have an excellent way of communicating effectively in a way that's also solidly based and so on. So in Rosh Hashanah, Sliach 10, that's the 10 letters. And we did the first 5, we began the 6th, we did the first 5. Sourced, grounded, heartfelt, sincere, lasting impact, initiative, action-based, applicable, and relevant. So we're up to clarity, carefulness, and precision. So I began that one with a zettel from the Rebbe that actually I received in the year Tov Shimon Beis. I'm not going to go over it again. I told the whole story. Very interesting parsha with Shnas Hashmenim. I'm just looking up here my. I want to get this as well online here. A minute, Kolel. Yeah, there we are. So I told the whole story. The reason I brought it here was not just Misad the Chvivusa de Milsen's Geschmack story, but you see the Rebbe's precision and klarkeit. Both in the Rebbe's response of how we should produce the kavitz for Yud Aleph Nisan Shnas Hashmenim. And you could look through this. You see the detailed, how the Rebbe Mamish made a whole list. You see the Tayela, Leheitzeler HaKevitz Shematarose Teira. Very clear. The Rebbe didn't want to have any persemis about the Rebbe's pulis. Shematarose Teira. Ulechein V'ala Seder. I'm reading from the Zettel. Let me just pull it up here so I also have it here in front of me. Here we go. So we're on 6. Clarity, carefulness, precision. So the Rebbe says, "Shemataroshe v'lechein v'ala seder, ma'atzemach tzedek, miyal eir, the kapitel pei, v'gam pei aleph, imam izmerim, v'yal eir." You just see the specifics. Next, ma'atzemach tzedek, the Rebbe makes, in Hebrew, in writing, you make 2 lines. Means it's like ditto. So he's repeating, instead of writing Me'at Samach Tzedek again, the Rebbe uses that. Ala posik yimesh neseinu gamer 6 Dile'il. Because I had written a list of things, so number 6 that I wrote, the Rebbe is now referring to here. So you see the diuk. Next, Ma'amur al-Maimer Chazal D'Chulin, from the Rebbe's father. Hatziyunim Hanal L'dach Shemavur Inyan Pei Shonim. And then Heisofe, Takonos Abal Shem Tov, the Kapitel Tilim, the Shneisov, Min Hogi Yem Eledes. So you see her a list, like Mamish, a list of a Meitzuleh, the Rebbe was a Meitzuleh. This is Tov Shimon Beis, the Rebbe Pasha writes how the kavod should be structured. And then you see a line, he writes, Eid V'ikar, Lehetzuleh, Hatanya, Begedel Rogil, just looking here. I'm not sure. I have to look. Can you see it? Can you see the words? Let me see if I could see it here. Big. Al HaSeder usually. Nitfus Lachrena, something, Brooklyn, La'achrei Ha'ores, V'tikunim. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. I could send you a pinuach of this. I have it somewhere. The point is that you start looking at this, you start seeing the diuk niflev, how the Rebbe, everything is gerechent. So I think it's best for me to sit here and try to, I can't read all the words, it's a copy. But that's where the Rebbe wrote, at the bottom, you see, Vitzilim dechol ha'sha'orim dechol ha'tanyas. And the Rebbe went into detail of how to produce that Tanya. It's really not Negel Yonenu so much, but my real goal was to show the Rebbe's diuk nifla. Okay? If you sit and break your head a little, you'll be able to figure it out. If not, as I said, I can send you a pinuach, no problem. Okay, good. Now, I'm going to move to the next item. What's the next caveat? This is page 11. After that page comes a few very interesting diuk among thousands. I just chose a few to show the Rebbe's diuk. I can tell you personally, I learned tremendous from this. That every time you choose a word, it should be as good as possible, the word that conveys the message. And that's key. Because can you trust, if you're going to give over a sikha to someone, in a shir or in a drasha or something, what words do you use? English is not the Rebbe's language. It's not the language of Torah and Chassidus. So how do you choose words? So seeing the yukim of the Rebbe and how he uses a word is fascinating. Just as an agav, it's not here. Someone just showed me that how do you translate bittul? How do we translate bittul? So most people translate it nullifying. Or sublimation is a more fancy English word. Or suspension of self. That's what I usually use. Bittul. We're not talking about bittul chametz now. We're talking about bittul in Aveda, bittul in Elikus, bittul mitzias, bittul ayesh, the bittul of oyer. How do you translate that in English? So why is it so important? I've mentioned many times that if you came to communicate something in simple English, it means you don't fully understand it. Now, most of you say bittul. You don't need to explain it. We all know what bittul is. Kavyachol. But can you explain it to someone that doesn't know what the musig is? So I saw in a maimer from the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, in Sefer Amorim Yiddish. How does he translate bittul? You would not believe it. He translates Ibegegebenkeit. That's what he translates. Huh? I'll tell you right here. I have it here. He translates Ibegegebenkeit. Let me look it up. I have it right. 1 second. And not only that, he translates it twice. Very interesting way. Yeah. Bittel übergegeben, koyach ma, the Kraft von Übergegebenkeit. I don't have the Maramokim here exactly, but it should be easy to find. So Übergegeben means in Hebrew hismasus. You dedicate it to something. You give yourself over. Koyach ma, who translate the Kraft from Übergegebenkeit, means the koyach, not just the power of ma. The Kraft means that the art of giving yourself over to something. Now, I never thought of it that way. I mean, the teichen for sure, but it opens up a whole new way of explaining the concept of bittul. Okay, so that's just as an aside. So now, let me go back to what we're discussing here. Just want to open it up. So here, the dugmais I'm giving here, we'll go from, from right to left to right. So the Rebbe sees the word lo yavudim ela muvulbolim. So, the Nesheh gave out a booklet in English. Rashi Parokim, I can even read it myself. Maybe you could help me here. Let me see it in the original here. Yeah. Basically about the Mesa of Nesheh B'nei Chabad. So, Bein Advarim, Hifi Amilim Shematarasim Hi, they wrote that one of the purposes of Nesheh B'nei Chabad is bring back our lost youth. The Rebbe erased the word lost, and he wrote confused. Now, you would think, what's wrong with bringing back our lost youth? We talk all the time, lost souls, lost sheep, No, the Rebbe doesn't want to use the word lost. He uses the word confused. Now, that doesn't mean you can never use lost, but why does the Rebbe not say lost? Because lost is very negative and very almost like hopeless. Even though the pasuk says, Evdim be'eretz Asher. Evdim is lost, not confused. But the Rebbe wants to speak in our generation, he wants to say confused youth, not lost. Interesting diuk. It reminds me, they recently released a video, audio of the Rebbe with Shazar, when he came in Tov Shalom and Gimel, to see the Rebbe the last time. So you hear he says to the Rebbe, the Amaratzis, from the Amaratzim in America, is and the Rebbe very calmly says, the Shverf, like they rufen, Anoshim Pshutim. But the Shazar can't control himself. At least two more times he says, Amaratzim. The Rebbe says, Anoshim Pshutim, the Shver genust Anoshim Pshutim. Then the Rebbe the third time says to him, Zokt Anoshim Pshutim, nicht Amaratzim. And then finally the Rebbe says, the Shver hat gesagt, from Baal Shem Tov, at the Pshitis, and Ish Pashat, the Gerechten Pshitis Ha'atzmos. So you just see one word. What's the big thing? Shazar is saying Amaratzim. People say it all the time. But the Rebbe was the diuk, because it's a whole different perspective. You all saw the video with George Rohr, when he told the Rebbe he runs a beginner's minyan. Jews with no background. And the Rebbe said, what? By Machne Yisrael. He says, what? And he repeats again, beginner's minyan. And the Rebbe told them, all Jews are Ben Avram, Yitzchak, V'Yankiv, B'Asar, Rivka, Rachel, V'Leah. There's no such thing as a Jew that has no background, as a beginner. Same taken again. So Amoritz and Ish Pashat is a very different meaning, besides the mile of the Ish Pashat Pshittis. But the Rebbe's Medaik, just common examples that you all know. The Rebbe didn't want to use Beis Chelim, but Beis Refuah. It's not a house of the sick, it's a house of healing. That's what the Rebbe said. By the Mitzuyani Yisrael, when the casualties, the Israeli soldiers that came in Lamed Vov in the summer, the Rebbe spoke that sikha to them. And the Rebbe said that by Eden Zok Mishloch Tzach Nishtam mit Ha'etzeh. And here, nevertheless, he's going to give an eitz that instead of calling them Nache Yisrael, which means the wounded, the hurt, the casualties, should be called Mitzuyane Yisrael. Same idea like special children. So the Rebbe says special children is not just a euphemism, not just a way of not insulting a child, so you call them a special child. The Rebbe says, no, they have special keiches taka. The Eibishter took something away, he gave them special keiches. So you see from these, one word, change, is a whole different attitude of how you communicate with people. As I said, I learned from this tremendous in so many different ways. I'll give you an example that is less known. One example everyone knows. The Rebbe never said the word schlechts. He never said ra. The Rebbe would say nishgut or hepechatev. Look in all the sikhs, it's hepechatev, nishgut. He would never say the word ra. Now, Kemuvin is from the Gemara that says that even begnusen shel behema, the Torah will not say tmeya, they'll say ena tehera, except when it comes to halacha. Halacha, you have to be clear, so it's mutar also, you can't leave anything ambiguous and unspoken. So the Rebbe never said that. And it was clear. But there's another thing interesting that I noticed when I started writing Fabrengens. So the Rebbe would give it into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would edit. I noticed an edit. I didn't notice it the first time. After a while, I noticed that Rebbe does not like the expression. You know, when you speak, you say, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu is nishnor arav ezecha melech vahi b'shur melech. Shabbos nishnor atog von enex ezecha atog von simcha. You know, this is common expressions. That's not only this; it's also this. You know, Torah, is it also nevuah or is it chochmah? You know, things like that. And you have constantly this expression that something is not only this, it's also this. In Hebrew, leirak zeh, leirak elogam, nishnor eich. Not only but addition. The Rebbe started, every time I saw that we wrote that, the Rebbe would change it. He would read nesef al, not nishnor. Un eich, nesef al Mesha being, in Sugav was Mesha's Rav is a Eich HaMelech. Nesef was Mashiach is Arav is Erech HaMelech. The Rebbe would write Nesef, not Loirak, Elo, Gam, but Nesef Al. Now you could say in Hebrew, or in English for that matter, or in Yiddish, what's the difference between Nishnor und Eich and Ne und Inzugab zu? Not only this, but also this, but you say in addition to this. Because you don't use the word not. The word not, the Rebbe didn't want to use it. Even though you're saying not only, but it still has a loy in there. And since it's a dovish b'kedusha like Shabbos or Moshe or whatever the examples I gave, the Rebbe Nesafal is keilu b'chlam masayimon. It also means loirak. So why not use a positive way of saying it instead of a negative way? Now this is very interesting. How many people you know are medayik on that level? Tell me how many people you know in speaking or writing are so precise. But this is common. Looking at the sikhs of the Rebbe, I saw it all the time. Once I saw the Rebbe do that, I never wrote it anymore that way. Now it's by me second nature. Whenever I read something or I write something, I read someone write, I right away change in addition to. Now, I wouldn't be medayik so much if it's a thing that's a negative thing, who cares? But in Kedusha, the Rebbe didn't want to use the word loy. Interesting, right?
How do you say it again?
In Hebrew, loy rak elagam, nesef al. So Shabbos, Nesef al Zesha Shabbos, who Einig Yesh Be'gam Simcha, for example. In Yiddish, it would Nishnor would be in Sugab or the Behisofa. That would be the way the Rebbe would say it. Okay.
It's interesting, by the bringing back law of youth versus confused youth, the Rebbe didn't change the bringing back aspect.
No. So that's right. So in a way, yeah, in a Chanami. But bringing back, so you could say, because they're confused, they still need to be brought to clarity. So yeah, nechanami, it's not as duyuk in English, lost would make sense to bring back, but he didn't change that, correct? Because the Rebbe was not negating that you need to do something to return them. Remember, tshuva also means bring back. So tshuva is return. But in Indian, you could have said to bring clarity to the confused youth. That would be very accurate. But I think the Rebbe was bothered mostly by the word lost. Again, remember, all these things could also have been the context. Would the Rebbe fix it everywhere? Lav dafki. Like if someone translated Evdim be'eretz Ashur, would the Rebbe change Evdim lost in Eretz Ashur to confused? Probably not. Because it is the word in Hebrew. There is a Lashon Ibud. But when you're using it on our generation, Tineke Shanishbu, the Rebbe didn't want to categorize them as lost. You know, it's the same idea, like, they're not a beginner's minyan. It's not people who don't know in Hebrew. The Rebbe doesn't emphasize that they don't have a chinuch. He wants to emphasize that they have something. So, you know, lost is a very, very strong word. If you're speaking in English, when you use the word lost, when you're speaking, you don't want to use lost unless you really want to make that point. Because it's very extreme. When you say someone's is lost. Anyway, another dugma to the right, look to the right, the Meneda. So the Rebbe, they wrote like this. It's talking about the Meneda, the public Menedas, the Rebbe God we trust. So then they wrote, the Meneda is particularly symbolic of political freedom.
Religious.
Of religious freedom. Yeah, my mistake. Of religious freedoms. The Rebbe changes that. And what does he write? I can't read it in my copy. Let me see it here. Because we don't have the Meneda is particularly reminding of religious freedom. So that's a very big difference. Symbolic is like a remez, a symbol, a sisma is a symbol. A symbol is like something that you use like an example to symbolize something. Reminding is particularly reminding or reminder. It's not reminder, reminding of. So that's much stronger. A symbol is more like a dugme. And reminding means that's what the Meneda does. It's like Haskaras Hanes, Pirsum Nisa, or whatever. I mean, that's not here Nisa, but it's the idea that it's a zecher. It's reminding us of it. And in other words, it has a direct impact on us. Because a symbol would mean, you put up some type of symbol, and that's supposed to remember. It's supposed to be a symbol of that idea. Reminding is much stronger in connecting the Meneda with the religious freedom that he says here. So that's yet again example. Remindful. Oh, I see they wrote remindful. If you look below, I don't think it's remindful. Mindful. Looks more like reminding. But remindful would be the right word in English. So remindful of religious freedom. My point here again is not so much the diuk in this specific thing, it's just the etzam inyan of precision and clarity. Very, very key. I would sometimes, in writing something, can spend hours just on a word to figure out how you translate that word. Like if you had to translate Atzilus on paper in English, what would you write? Most people would not know what to write. So most, what they do often, they just write Atzilus with italics. And that's it. That solves the problem. So you didn't solve anything. How would you write Elam HaAtzilus? So Atzilus literally means to emanate. V'yatzalti min haruach al Meisha to the Skenim, that he imparted. You can say he imparted from the spirit, and he imparted. But we say the world of imparting, that would be.
I'm saying.
Yeah, but let's say he's going to print. What would you write?
Why don't you give a short description of explaining?
Okay, so then that hagufa, what would you write? So, and still, you can give a description, but you have to say some word. I usually use for Atzilus the world of unity or the world of vision. It's not an exact translation, but it's the one that captures most what Atzilus is. Bria, you could say is easier, the world of creation. Yitzira, the world of formation. That's the words used. The world of Asiyah is the world of action. But someone reads creation, formation, action. Is that really accurate? What about Mamala Kalam and Sevav Kalam? So I don't want to go into this right now. We're not going to go into a whole study of translation. But the Rebbe actually has a letter in English where he explains the worlds and uses interesting words to explain each one of them. So if you're talking about literal translation, and we know in Hebrew, literal translations don't always work. Look at how many mefarshim are in the word Bereishis is bara. Look at all the mefarshim, Rashi, Ramban, Even Ezra. What does bara mean? Create. We understand. What does it mean? So they talk that bara is only shaykh yashma'ayin. It's just words in Hebrew happen to be very difficult to translate in English. Sometimes you need a lot of words, and sometimes you need to explain it. But the point here is diuk. Okay. Some more examples of diuk. And this is a little also, I have no problem. Sometimes the Rebbe made a little humor on my cheshbon, which is fine. So here, let's open this one. Next page. In clarity, are there page numbers on this thing? Yeah, this is page 12, it should be, right? Yeah, page 12. So let's start from the left side. Okay. Let me see what's going on here. Yeah. Huh?
Not so clear, this one.
I know. I'll tell you what it says here. This was...
How about the Bittel story?
What?
The Bittel one. So what does that mean?
Where do you see Bittel?
On the previous page, right on the Meneda, Bittel surrender instead of submission. You spoke about it before, but where did it come into context? Did it came from the Rebbe?
You're talking about the Meneda is symbolic, remindful?
Right under that, it says there about Bittel surrender instead of submission.
Oh, I didn't read that. Right, that's correct. Why didn't I read it? Oh, because it didn't come out of my print, yeah. This is, I didn't have a Ksav Yad, but I found it in one of the edits of the Rebbe, where he translates Bittel. I mentioned Bittel in the Sefer Mamor in Yiddish. It says, the Rebbe, it says submission. That, you mavatal yourself, you submit yourself to somebody, or submission, Bittel is submitting. The Rebbe changed it to surrender, which itself is a pretty interesting diuk. Thank you for reminding me. I missed that. Yeah. Surrender is like when you have in a war. Yesh milchama, one side gives up to the other. How do you translate that in Hebrew?
It's really surrendering is like
Yeah, in the Malyusa, huh? Nichna. Come on, nichna. Chnoa ubitl. Chnoa v'shiflas by enim dim lispal el meterke v'dresh. But I would say, obviously, surrender here is not surrender to an enemy. It's not a war. Surrender is a form of, you called it, Hachna is a good word actually in Hebrew in that sense. Hachna l'Kadosh Baruch Hu. What word did you just say? Surrender? Where you acknowledge. What was the word you just said? You said a word. Haidah. Haidah is acknowledgement. Haidah is definitely the state of bittul. Surrender means that you can feel keichiv eitzim yadi, I'm in control, and you surrender control to the Eibishter. What's betochen? That the Eibishter is going to take care of everything. That was really what is referring to here. Now, let's be careful. Remember, it's always context. I wouldn't say every time it says bittul. In Chassidus, you could just say surrender. The Rebbe wrote it specifically in that place. I'm not sure what the context was there. But for example, bittul hayesh, would you say surrender of the yesh, surrender, bittul b'mitzias, surrender of the mitzias? I don't know if surrender would be the right word there. But it's interesting, submission, on the other hand, is definitely it has negative connotation. Because submission is almost like what a eved submits to an odin. So even though by the Eden there's the concept of Kabbalah sale in that sense, but submission also has a sign of weakness, that you're weak, so you submit. Surrender, it can be an element of, like you said, Haidah, acknowledging or recognizing and surrendering your will. Aseh ritzein cha k'ritzei nei, for example. Surrendering your will to God's will. Anyway, that's the word that Rebbe used. I'm not going to overanalyze it. The point again is diuk, and diuk is, you learn much from this diuk. Okay, now, let us go now to the next page. The next page is, let me open it here. On the left side, okay, the story about this is like this. I don't know did I tell you guys what happened when the Rebbe was Magia, the Sikha? This is Vayeshev Tovshinun Beis. When he was Magia about the Marseille, the French Haderes Vamun L'Chaylamim. Okay, I think I told the story here, no? About the change in the song? Okay, I'll tell it now. So the left side on page 12 is, if you read it, you'll see the details. The Rebbe spoke then, a very, very powerful, unique Sikha. We spoke about that in the time of the Alter Rebbe was opposed, right, to Napoleon winning the war. And he supported Alexander of Russia to win the war, right? So the Rebbe said, what was the reason? Because the Alter Rebbe felt that even though France would offer the Jews more freedom begashmias, but beruchnius would be more challenging. Alexander, then, Eden would have more tzaras begashmias, anias, poverty, suffering, and so on. But beruchnius they'd be in better shape. And the Alter Rebbe, of course, prevailed. The whole story, he went to blow shofar early that Rosh Hashanah in the morning, and he won. And Alexander did win the war at the end. And you could look from history, you see the Alter Rebbe was right, because imagine, even with Alexander winning the war, look what happened to the Jewish people. Look at assimilation. Imagine had France won and they would have offered the Jews freedom without a God, what the assimilation would have looked like. It would have been far, far worse. But then the Rebbe said, that was the Alter Rebbe's times. But today we can go to France and to the Western world and not be afraid. And he compared it to Yaakov Avinu. That Yaakov, when he saw Esav said, Yovei Yalai Adeni Se'era, come live nearby. And what did Yaakov answer? Visnalo li'iti. The Tsein Rakes, the Yolodim Ketanim, basically that we're not ready yet to live side by side. So Chassidus explains why. Because Yaakov recognized that Esav was still not ready for the Geula, and he was not strong enough to deal with the Klippa of Esav, Malchus Edom. So Rashi says, so what, he lied to Esav? No, Chaz v'shalom. He told him that we're going to come slowly. And that's Asaf Kol Sof, when Mashiach comes, will be V'hoysel Hashem Amlucha, at the end of Avadya, and Edom will be in his body, and we will be together. So basically, Yaakov is saying we're not ready yet. Similar to the Alter Rebbe saying we're not ready yet to go into the emek of Klippas Edom, France. But now the Rebbe says 7 generations later, Der Ashvi, now we could be Mevarer, Sarfas. And the Rebbe compared Tzorfas, said Tzorfas Eisius Faratzdo. That's why Tzorfas is the posuk in the Nevuah, talks about the Birur of Tzorfas. And the Rebbe hinted to his own life being in France, going to France with the Rebbetzin. It's a very powerful sikh. If you haven't learned Vayeshev Nun Beis, it's one of the Yesedis of the Yesedis, especially around the Yoni Geula. Then the Rebbe continued and said the following. And what happened was that after in Tovshin Lamed Dalet by Simchas Torah, Chassidim took the nigun of France. Not only are we not afraid of France, but Mahapach France, and turned it into Aderes V'Amunah L'Chaye Elamim. And then the Rebbe said a Dover Nifla happened. What happened? That a little while after Chassidim took the nigun, the Rebbe is talking about himself. And the Simchas Torah Lamed Dalet, I remember, by the third Akofe, the Rebbe went out and started singing Aderes V'Amunah L'Chaye Elamim with the French anthem. It took around 2 minutes till anyone realized, no one knew what the Rebbe was singing. We heard the words, Aderes V'Amunah, until the Frenchies who came as Orchim, they recognized it and realized, and they started singing, Lebedik and Freilich, Lamed Dalet, Simchas Torah, Night of Akofis. And then the Rebbe said, that's Lamed Dalet. Now he's talking Nun Beis. We're talking about 10, 18 years later. And the Rebbe said, what happened? That the French government changed the nigun. The nigun was a very aggressive nigun. They changed some tenuas and some words. And the Rebbe said, because once you're mavada the klippah, so Kedusha took away the so-called the negative of the klippah, so they actually changed the nigun. The nigun itself was changed. That's what he said. That's what the Rebbe said in the Fabreng in that Shabbos Vayeshev Nun Beis. So when we prepared the Sikha, when I prepared the Sikha, the Rebbe always taught us that everything has to be checked and not print anything without confirming. So I called up Mullah Zimov in Paris, in France, and I said to him, told him what the Rebbe said, can you check? Not Chaz v'Sholem, I had a suffix what the Rebbe said, but the Rebbe wanted always everything should be confirmed, that nothing should be published without checking exactly what happened. So I said, can you look in the newspapers or find from Lamed Dalet and on, did anything change? Or is this Aruch Nizdika Maisa? So he calls me back a few hours later. Yeah. In Lamed Vov, a little after, Lamed Hey, I should say, a year later, the president of France introduced a shinui in the nigun. Not the nigun is not a new song, but there was some tenuas that were very aggressive. They became a little edeler, and some words were changed. But he said, but then the next president came to the next election, and he changed it back, because they wanted like the original. There was always that fight, like the original, not the original. So I said, how is it now? It says it's changed back. So he faxed me all these newspaper clips. I send them into the Rebbe, writing this note, and saying the Rebbe said so-and-so, here's what I found out. And I sent in the French newspapers, like fax clips, 3 or 4 articles. And this is what the Rebbe wrote back. The Rebbe wrote back to me the following. Let me read it inside. The Rebbe wrote like this. Lahachnis kol zeh b'ha'ara b'tchilas hasicha b'pama aleph shenisker hashinui. Yeah. B'pama aleph shenisker hashinui. So the Rebbe said like this. Put this into ha'ara, exactly what happened. It's the first place in the Sikha where it says, where it was mentioned that there was a shinui in the song. Put in the ha'ara that the shinui happened this and this year, and then write that the next year or the next memshola, the next administration changed it. You see, the Rebbe writes mohir, important. Okay.
Mahir is important or Mahir is urgent?
Urgent, mahir. It could be from the word fast, urgent. Okay. The next settle below it. We did exactly what the Rebbe said. We wanted the Rebbe to see it, to make sure it's what he likes, which we often did. After we prepared the order, we sent it in. And the Rebbe wrote the following on the side. Yiu eit chadoshes bezeh b'derech hateva, I think. In other words, Itaka says there was a change back, but there's going to be news b'derech hateva. In other words, even in natural, not miraculous, there's going to be there's going to be news, which will be more changes will happen. And then the Rebbe wrote to us, "Ve'einin yonam nochleifen hachadoshes." It's not your job to nochleifen and run after the news. What the Rebbe was referring to the newspapers I sent in. The Rebbe wasn't giving us musar. He just says, not your job. Our job here is Torah. The Rebbe said there was a change. There was a change. It changed back. There will be a change in B'derech HaTeva, Chadoshes, but that's not your job, is to run after Chadoshes. So I stuck it in here because, again, you see clarity, carefulness. That's the tzatl on the left. Tzatl on the right is even more fun. Tzatl on the right is very rare and unique. You're not going to see this every day. Even this one about the nigun is also pretty interesting. In Shabbos Chazain, Tafshin Mem Zayin. Okay? I believe it was Mem Zayin. So the Rebbe, Shabbos Chazain, would speak very often the Torah of Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev. That Chazain comes from the word and the mashal that every Jew is shown the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi Merachik. You know the mashal, right? Yeah. Every Jew is shown the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi from a distance in order to awaken Gaguyim, the yearning to want it and do whatever we have to do to bring the Geula and Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi. Rabbi Yitzchak gives a mashal with a melech that weaved a beautiful shirt for his child, and then the child played and tore it. So the melech went and weaved a better shirt, even a bigger and more beautiful one. And he also tore it. So this time the Eibishter said, no, I'm not going to give Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni like I gave it. This way I'll just show it to them. The Rebbe went in a whole sicha asking a question, what's the point of showing Beis Hamikdash when nobody sees it? Who sees it? So what's the point? The Rebbe said, then you can't answer like you say about the Chruzim. It says every day, Baskel Yitzas Har. That says, and Shuvu Bonim Shevavim. So Chassidus asks, if nobody hears the Baskel, what's the point? So it says, Mazlayo Chazi. The Neshama hears it. And it causes Shuvu. The Rebbe, the Shelo, you can't say the same thing, because that's a kol. For Shuvu here, it says, you see the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rebbe went back and forth in trying to explain this. It was not an easy sikha. So I wrote a bunch of questions, and I wrote up the sikha. So what you see is the Rebbe being magiyet. And the Rebbe writes, this is the interesting piece. The Rebbe writes the following. On the left side, the Rebbe writes, he edits it, but then he writes on the side, you see a box with an arrow? So the Rebbe writes like this, Kenira, Tofsu. Kenira Tofsu, because that was an expression that was always used in the Sikhs, Tofsu, late Tafasnu, that we didn't understand. So the Rebbe says, Kenira Tofsu v'nemar, Sherei b'nei Yisrael ro b'peil b'Shabbos Chazain, Shabbos Kedesh Chazain, the Hey Tov Shemem Vov, or Mem Zayin. I'm trying to see the exact words. Let me just see. The Beis Hamikdash Hagimel. Then the Rebbe writes, V'chezin al zeh riboy pa'omim. And the Rebbe writes, this is what he writes at the bottom. B'pashtas case of Hareshim, that refers to me. That B'pashtas, the Reshim, the one who wrote the Sikha, Shero b'Shabbos Chazain Beis Hamikdash Hagimel Lamaila. So the Rebbe is writing that since I write it in such a way, it means that the Reshim is as if I saw the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi b'peil with my own eyes, Lamaila. So that's a pretty, I would say, quite shtickle l'tzonis on my cheshbon. In other words, the way the Sikha was written by the Rebbe, it came across that as the one who wrote it actually saw the Beis Hamikdash. So I just felt I'd throw it in here, just again, to show the Rebbe's klarkeit and challenging any type of issue here that would seem confusing. Then the Rebbe fixed up the whole piece, and he wrote up a whole piece on the left side, which I'm not going to go into right now, just again to show you precision. Okay. Next page, 13. One more about clarity, two more actually, clarity, carefulness, and precision. Page 13. So here's the one we learned actually, so I'm not going to go into detail. Remember? By the Meneda. So I gave out this Xavier here, a copy, where the Rebbe takes whispering flames and says, and the change of the flames. So I'm not going to go over this because we did this Hanukkah time, if you remember. But it definitely brings clearly, like the word whispering, again, is whispering a correct word to use? Friedrich Rebbe says, zuhören, was the Lichterlech erzählen, to listen to what the Lichterlech tell us. But whispering suggests that it's bechashoy, belachash. It's quiet, and that's the hepech of pesum and nisa. So the Rebbe did not like that word whispering, so we had to change it. Again, tachlis hadiyuk. And the same with the other diyukim which we went over. I don't want to go over it again because we did it already here in this Shir back Hanukkah time. Remember that? Okay. What's on the right side? Oh, the right side is a very interesting settle where the Rebbe writes from the few times hadracha, how to write a fabringen, how to write a sicha. So I'm going to read it quickly. And the Rebbe says like this: Hore klolis, shnei matores efanim bebir inyan. When you explain an inyan, there are two matores, two goals, and two efanim, two ways to explain something. This was not to me. This was to someone who was adapting one of the sikhs from the Rebbe. They wanted to present it like more for Bnei Yeshivas. So they were taking the Likutei Sichos and turning it into like something more pilpuldik. So the Rebbe was not happy with everything that was done. So he wrote this note, which is a general note about how to prepare, how to explain something. So he says there's two ways and two goals and two ways. And the Rebbe numbers them. Aleph, here you'll see also, just Agav, the Rebbe is very, very bekitzer. But Dibur, the Rebbe spoke by Riches Nifla. In writing, the Rebbe was bekitzer nimritz. It can sometimes take literally hours and hours to figure out a settle from the Rebbe. Not the Ksav, the Teichem. Very, very bekitzer. Like mamish, like the Ragachover style. Every word is b'diuk, but very short and so on. So here are the two ways. Matoris efanim. Aleph, biur ha-psak din v'taimov. You take a psak din, in halacha, let's say, and you explain it. Here's the psak din, and here are the reasons for it. It's almost like learning the Shulchan Aruch, psak din. Beis, a different efen, and a different matara, is also legitimate. Biur ha'in mechol zdodim u'bechol protov. In other words, you're not starting out with the maskona, what the halacha is, the psak din, and giving the reasons, like the Alter Rebbe does, let's say in Shulchan Aruch. So the Rambam doesn't give taimei halachas. The Alter Rebbe does. No, here the other way. B'chol zdodov u'b'chol protov. You're giving a full pilpul, a full discussion from every angle. You don't see that by psak din. When you learn Shulchan Aruch, you don't see every opinion. You only see the maskana and the reason. You go to the Gemara, you go to the Shenim, you go to the previous poskim, and you can start seeing there's other opinions and other approaches. So the second efen is bir ha'inyan b'chol zdodov u'b'chol protov. Ze machriach li'konis le'proti protim. Once you do that, you can't leave out any detail, because if you leave out a detail, in the psak din approach, you don't need to bring details, except what's negated to the psak, the maskana. But here, once you go into pratim, you can't leave out any. So it's machriach that you have to go into details, all the details. And once you go into details, it gets even more complicated. Because there's minakotza lakotza. You'll have one opinion, it's chayev, and one opinion, it's mutter. Chayev or potter, rather. Or mutter and osur. So you have to give a svara azay and a svara farket, and it could be mamish one extreme to the next. Min hakotza lakotza, shemevinim bepashtus Oh, after Kotza L'Kotza, the Rebbe writes a Nekuda time, a colon, which means once you bring a Kotza L'Kotza, on one hand there'll be Svaras that are Mevinim B'Pashtus. That means there are simple Svaras that are easy to understand. Va'ad, the other extreme would be Svaras that are B'Dechik, and the Rebbe writes even maybe Godel. So in other words, once you start going into details like that, you're now dealing with all kinds of extreme theories, one extreme to the next. Some are b'pashtus, some are b'dechik, meaning it's not really clear. It's a dechik and dechik godel, perhaps. Yeah, correct. The b'dechik godel yesh lema. That's the other extreme of a svara, not a b'pashtus svara, but more of a dechik godel. Now, let me just see how the Rebbe continues. Now he says, "Ha'achreinim dershim havara b'yeser." I think he's referring to the second approach. So the second approach, the first approach, which is psak din and taimei hapsak, is okay. But here, once you go into this, you really have to go. It requires havara b'yeser. You have to clarify everything, because you can't just bring it briefly, because you'll confuse whoever's learning it. Okay, there's missing a number one, because now he's explaining, once you bring different svaras, so number one, you need havara b'yeser. Number two, liyeser b'hirus, efshel hesif, av shedechaku kiyetze b'zeh. So in other words, basically the Rebbe is being shale of the second ephim, because it's only dov self. Because now, in order to bring more clarity, you can add that even though this svara is a dechik, and so on and so forth. So you're explaining why you're rejecting one svara over another. And three, masim yeser b'sefer shakavitari kerogel bekam and meforshim. What is that? 01? What is that? Forshim? V'svarim maybe? V'svarim. Let me just look at the ksav for a moment, because I think there's something written wrong here. Yeah, v'svarim. Okay. So it's masim yeser. It's more fitting. B'sefer shakavitaria kerogel bekam meforshim b'svarim. That this avshadechik should come at the end of the whole discussion, as it's rogel in many svarim. In other words, you begin with an explanation, a simple explanation. Then you say there's another svara. It could be b'dechik, and then at the end of the whole shakavitaria, you include that at the end. My point, the Rebbe is basically saying that this second ephim requires basically a whole sefer. He was being shalal, I recall correctly, he was being shalal this approach, because it's ein l'davar sof, because you then have to produce something that you bring every possible svara ahin, and it could just be more confusing. That was one thing the Rebbe said. Then the Rebbe wrote, "V'eid v'gam ze'ikar, yesh ne'limud al pi hasbora b'pashtus. Mebli la'arav b'zeh u'levar u'levayir hashitis, the chol gdel Yisrael u'belimud kazeh." I'm sorry, chol gdel Yisrael. The chayred, what's the Eid V'gam Ze'ikir? Isn't that the first approach? It looks like he's saying that instead of using this whole approach, b'dechik kaher nahin, he's saying the ikir is there should be a limit with b'pashtus hasbara b'pashtus, and no mix in and try to clarify all the shittas. What they were trying to do was take the Rebbe Sicha and fit it into every shitta possible in that sugya. The Rebbe says, no, u'belimud kazeh, b'pashtus, called the poshet mailatveh. The simpler it is, the better it is. The Rebbe then says, well, the ani is daiti, in my humble opinion, what you sent me, the Sicha you presented to me, I have to look in the Ksav. They weren't, the Fanir there, B'Mitzur was ein dechik. Ein dechikim ukiyetze b'zeh. Af she'erusi bekam l'shitosi da'makshe. Listen, it looks like that the Rebbe is saying that you don't write deichik at all, you just bring different shittas, and you don't distinguish and differentiate between a simple svara and a more complicated one. I'm not sure what he means, Af she'erusi bekama. That although I did mention some of them as a deichik, l'shitose da'makshe, based on the questions that were asked to me. That's what it seems like he's saying. And then the Rebbe concludes, V'derech zeh melamed Rashi Rabban shel Yisrael b'pirush al Atera al Hashas and al Hashas. That was Rashi's approach. Basically, the Rebbe is here giving clarity how to present something much more in a simple approach instead of trying to fit the Rebbe into all the sugyas and all the details from one side to the other side. This was a hira that was given, and obviously this is the way most sikhs are written. That's why you'll find in many sikhs, even though sometimes, obviously, the different shittas are brought, but you never see it to the extreme of like an encyclopedic approach, where you take the sugya in every possible angle because there's just too much to bav on. That's this settle. Okay. Let me cover one more page with clarity, carefulness, and precision, page 14. Okay, moving. This you can study the rest of your life if you like. I'm just giving it to you so you have the Nakudis. Oh, 1 second. This is a repeat. No, I think I finished clarity, right? Yeah, I think I finished that. Yeah, I think it's finished. Yeah. So I'll do one more on page 15. I thought I'd finish them all, but okay. No. This one is called Hopeful and Being Positive. That a big focus by the Rebbe, I mentioned before, not to say the word negative words, like lost, house of the sick, Beit Chalim, or Nachei Yisrael, it should be the Mitziyane, and not use the word evil. So here I want to focus on the Rebbe's showing how everything has to be written in a way that's positive, because you have to always think of the effect it's going to have on the Makabel. So here was a settle, I thought there was a very nice settle, which is about, this was Tzivus Hashem, which gave out, they wanted to give out cartoons. You know, they make cartoons for children. So in the cartoons, Mashiach times, so what do you do when you do a cartoon? You don't show a regular face, it's a caricature. You know what a caricature? A nose is big, the eyes are this, everything is magnified, is exaggerated. So here's the Rebbe's answer. B'ksav is on the left, and the Pinuach is on the right. The Rebbe writes, Hamichtav Eis, this magazine, this newspaper, this magazine, Be'ikrei b'shvil ktanim, v'hachit seirim. It's primarily for children, and very young children. L'chein mechanchim v'sikim da'anal tzichim l'hachlit b'chol anal. That's why the elderly, the older educators, need to be careful in deciding how they're going to present something that's a chinuch for children and for especially young children. And here's what the Rebbe says: B'chlal ein tzarich liyas tziyurim de bali chayim bilti teherim. There shouldn't be images of impure animals. You know, we know the Rebbe spoke about this Chof Cheshbon Mem Daled, about giving children and showing them things that are not tohid. But here the Rebbe writes it clearly, not just as stuffed toys or something, or stuffed animals, but also tziyurim de balachayim built. That's number one. Why? Because it has an effect on children. Like kedai, the Rebbe continues, like kedai shabnei odam, that people that are presented in the cartoons, you know, you present people, bnei odam, tziyuri bnei odam, yitzur dafke loy b'hametzias, loy kahametzias. You don't have to make them, they should look not normal. You know, a person is a person. When you see cartoons, you see the big nose, large ears, you know, all that. It should not be made in a way that's not kametzias. And the Rebbe gives an example. Shmeinim b'yeser, very fat. You know, you see a lot of cartoons. The guy is very fat. Chetim gadol b'yeser, a very large nose, ukiyetze b'zeh, and similar. Af shehurgelu dafke came by comics. That's the word in English. Even though this has become the custom that people do it that way in comics, l'daiti tos chinuchi gdelehi. In my opinion, it's a major educational mistake. Ki kol de poshet the normal yeser b'nigdele ktanim mailetve. The simpler and the more normal for children, the better it is. The Rebbe again called the poshet mailetve. And then the Rebbe adds an interesting parenthesis. Well, the daiti gam b'nigdele gdelim. In my opinion, also for gdelim, things should be done in a real way and not like these fake images and so on. And here's not the place to be ma'irich. Interesting, huh? And interesting the Rebbe's approach to this is, of course, not just about cartoons. It's b'chlal. Be real. Don't create fake illusions. Children today, everything is fantasy. Cartoons, online, everything is not real. And basically, you're teaching them that about not reality. They should see things. Children should see things as they're real and realistic. Like the Rebbe says these words: "Poshet unormal yeser," more normal, not crazy, in any particular way. And also for Gdelim, but what's the income mekeme? Probably that with Gdelim it's going to be harder to deal with than with the children. Maybe that's what the Rebbe means. One more thing I want to say, and then we'll conclude. When we prepared another ad, which I don't have a copy of, maybe I have to find it somewhere. I prepared an ad for the 9 days. So the 9 days, the Rebbe, of course, had many heros, sim b'mishpet tapoda, v'shaveh b'tzedakah, to learn hichos b'sabchira, to add in limud, to add in tzedakah, siyumim. There was a whole bunch of heros. So we made an ad for the New York Times. So the way I made the ad was that even these are the 9 saddest day in the calendar, we do everything possible to reveal the Yehovchi Yomel, the Sassan Simcha Meitem, the positive. So I wrote it almost like poetic. From sorrow, we look for joy. From pain, we look for healing. I don't remember all. From darkness, we look for light. What did the Rebbe do? He crossed out the whole first column. He didn't leave the words from sorrow to joy. It just left to joy, to healing, to light, to positivity. He didn't even want to say that, which is interesting because it's a losh. We know it's day yogin, v'anocha. There's a whole bunch of names that we give the 9 days and the 3 weeks. But the Rebbe wanted again to focus on the positive. And that's what the ad was said. It was interesting. It said, in these saddest days of the year, to joy, to light, and so on. In other words, the Rebbe didn't have to go spell out the negative. Huh?
People understand.
Yeah. So often when I speak, I don't necessarily tell this, but I always remember it. And I always say to people, your problems I don't have to be ma'irichin. You all know your problems. I'm here to help you find solutions. I don't have to go over all the tzoros of everything. So I remember someone...
You're able to define it properly.
That's not the stira to this. That's not a stira to this. That's not the stira. The Rebbe's not saying you shouldn't deal with the machla. The question is what you're focusing on. Obviously you need, when you're dealing with someone, you have to address the issue. The Rebbe spoke in halacha, you have to say klar. We're talking about more language and sprach. You have to always focus on the positive. Okay, so we'll continue. I'll finish the rest of it the next week. We'll stop here.